Το Χαλέπι λίγες ώρες κράτησε, έτσι, η ιστορία.
Και από ό,τι φαίνεται η κατάσταση θα είναι δραματική για πολύ πολύ καιρό ακόμα.
Στον πόλεμο λέγονται ψέματα. Όχι μόνο εκεί, αλλά λέγονται και εκεί.
Ναι, σαφώς.
Προπαγάνδα είναι αυτό.
Το παιχνίδι της προπαγάνδας είναι το χειρότερο από όλα αυτά που έχουν υποστεί αυτόν τον καιρό οι άνθρωποι εκεί. Αυτό όμως που θα δούμε τώρα, Αντώνη, είναι κάτι διαφορετικό. Οι άνθρωποι των γιατρών χωρίς σύνορα έχουν φτιάξει μια προσομοίωση, είναι το βίντεο που βλέπουμε εδώ. Πώς ζουν οι γιατροί στα νοσοκομεία του Χαλεπίου. Νομίζω ότι πρέπει να το ακούμε καλύτερα και να μην μιλάμε.
Ναι.
Έτσι ακριβώς βιώνουν μέσα στα νοσοκομεία οι άνθρωποι που προσπαθούν να κάνουν τη δουλειά τους και να βοηθήσουν ανθρώπους που πάσχουν από όλα αυτά τα προβλήματα.
Λοιπόν, τι γίνεται τώρα εκεί?
Έχουμε νεότερα πολλά. Πρώτα απ' όλα είχαμε τηλεφωνική συνομιλία Ερντογάν-Πούτιν. Πριν από λίγο συμφώνησαν και οι δύο ότι θα πρέπει να σταματήσουν άμεσα οι εχθροπραξίες στην πόλη για να μπορέσουν με ασφάλεια να φύγουν οι πολίτες. Από την άλλη, ο Λαυρόφ με τον Κέρι επίσης μίλησαν στο τηλέφωνο και εκεί ο Λαυρόφ είπε ότι μπορεί η Μόσχα να βοηθήσει ώστε να φύγουν με ασφάλεια όλοι οι πολίτες και όσοι άνθρωποι βρίσκονται εγκλωβισμένοι στην πόλη, που συνεχίζονται κάποιες μάχες και κάποιοι βομβαρδισμοί σε συγκεκριμένα σημεία, παρά το γεγονός ότι το μεγαλύτερο μέρος της πόλης, όπως το έχουμε πει εδώ και μέρες, έχει πέσει στα χέρια της κυβέρνησης, του κυβερνητικού στρατού. Αυτό που επίσης ανακοινώθηκε είναι ότι η Τουρκία, Ρωσία και η Ιράν θα έχουν στις 27 Δεκεμβρίου μια συνάντηση στη Μόσχα, μάλλον σε επίπεδο ηγεσίας. Δεν είναι γνωστό ακόμα.
Μάλιστα. Έχουμε όμως πολλές ανθρώπινες ιστορίες εκεί. Με αυτά που συμβαίνουν, για να δούμε.
بظن اخر فيديو اوجهه لاني ملينا من الحكي ملينا الخطابات ما حدا سائل علينا وما حدا بيحكي وهي بظن انه رساله من قلب محروق اكثر من هيك ما عاد احكي وهي برميل هذا ختام الفيديو.
Μέσω Twitter και Facebook, με απευθείας συνδέσεις στα διεθνή δίκτυα. Οι πολίτες στο Χαλέπι λένε το τελευταίο αντίο και οι βόμβες πέφτουν σε απόσταση αναπνοής. Όσοι βρίσκονται εκεί μιλούν για κόλαση, ενώ ο ΙΕ κάνει λόγο για το τέλος της ανθρωπότητας.
If it's in the building itself or if it is in the street, so it will like killing nobody or the casualties will be more few, let's say. But until now, the attacks is being getting very intensified until now, as you can hear.
Yeah, as we can hear. I mean, it is unimaginable.
Είναι οι άνθρωποι που τάχθηκαν κατά του Μπασάρ Αλ-Άσαντ από την αρχή. Και τώρα που όλα έχουν τελειώσει, φοβούνται ότι η σύλληψη ή ακόμη και η εκτέλεση από τις Συριακές δυνάμεις δεν θα αργήσει να έρθει.
I'm coming to you as an average person here in besieged Aleppo. We may not be able to send any more messages as regime forces push closer and closer. The airstrikes become more intense.
This may be my last video. More than 50,000 of civilians who rebelled against the dictator Al-Assad are threatened with field executions or dying under bombing.
Τα μέλη της οργάνωσης Λευκά Κράνη σταμάτησαν τις επιχειρήσεις διάσωσης στα Συντρίμμια. Ψάχνουν και αυτοί τρόπους να προστατεύσουν τις οικογένειές τους.
Yeah, of course I'm worried. I'm really scared about what happened. There's no choice. There's no choice. Maybe we'll be slaughtered by knives.
Περισσότερους από 4 μήνες κρατάει η πολιορκία του Χαλεπίου. Τα νοσοκομεία έχουν διαλυθεί. Στους δρόμους κοίτονται νεκροί, τους οποίους οι συγγενείς φοβούνται να περισυλλέξουν. Τρόφιμα, φάρμακα και άλλα είδη ανάγκης έχουν τελειώσει. Χιλιάδες οικογένειες είναι σε απόγνωση.
We were free people. We wanted the freedom. I hope you can remember us.
that the people support their army and government is absolutely true. Whatever you hear in the corporate media is the complete opposite. And on that note, what you hear in the corporate media, and I will name them, BBC, Guardian, New York Times, etc., on Aleppo is also opposite of reality.
Oh man, somebody find Gary Johnson. We're about to get real and talk about Aleppo. Today in the news, it came out that the Syrian army had liberated the city of Aleppo and was going around systematically killing people in the streets, namely civilians. Now, I'm going to talk about this story, and I'm going to provide some sources here as to why I think this is not true and why we should not believe the reports coming from the Western media. Now, on December 9th, just a few days ago, independent Canadian journalist Eva Bartlett gave a 20-minute press conference as to why we should not believe the fake news coming from the Western media. But why should we believe her? What are her credentials?
I've been to Syria 6 times since 2014, 2 of which were with international delegations, and 4 times were independently on a visa I applied for, paid for, and waited for. My trips have been self-funded or fundraised, and I've gone at my own risk and been able to travel freely in the country to areas I wish to travel to. I've been many times to Homs, to Malula, to Latakia, Tartus, Siath, Sweda, and again Aleppo 4 times.
So she has street cred that 99.9% of other reporters don't have. She's actually boots on the ground, getting the real story from the people, watching events unfold. And she covered a lot of topics in her press conference, one of which was the ceasefires and why they don't work. Here's what she had to say.
There is no faith that any of the parties that the U.S. and Western leaders who have funded these terrorists, there's no faith that they can actually control the terrorists and get them to adhere to a ceasefire. And the people of Aleppo want Aleppo to be completely freed. And the last ceasefire in September was from the very start negated by 20 main terrorist factions who declared they were not going to participate, and from the very beginning violated the ceasefire over 300 times during the duration of the ceasefire. And not only these terrorist factions, while the Syrians and while the Russians adhered to the tenets of the ceasefire, but the American-led coalition itself violated the ceasefire by targeting Syrian army positions in Deir ez-Zor, killing at least 83 Syrian soldiers in a prolonged attack that lasted nearly 1 hour and which enabled ISIS to overtake that position.
Next, she implicated the so-called Free Syrian Army into a massive amount of human rights abuses, including executions, hoarding food, oppression of the citizens, blowing up hospitals. Here's just a few of the things she had to say.
2012 has been inhabited by different terrorist factions, among them al-Nusra, among them the so-called Free Syrian Army, which has committed the same heinous acts of terrorism as al-Nusra, as ISIS, as Ahrar al-Sham, as Nuruddin al-Zinki, which beheaded a 12-year-old Palestinian child and somehow is still deemed moderate. Since 2012, these areas of Aleppo, which have now recently been freed, their occupation by these terrorist factions has meant the greater Aleppo, the 1.5 million plus population of greater Aleppo, have suffered sieges denying them food and medicine. They've suffered for years a want of electricity and water, and they've suffered daily bombardment by these terrorists of mortars, of gas canister bombs, which are improvised and made locally, of water heater bombs, which are even more powerful and can level floors of entire buildings, of conventional weapons like Grad rockets supplied by the West, and etc. The terrorists that declare themselves liberators of Syria do not want people to leave. They've been holding civilians hostage. And if you're following reports that are not BBC and that are not New York Times, you will see countless testimonies of civilians, of the 100,000 civilians who've been liberated the last week, saying, thank God for the Syrian Arab army that liberated us, and the terrorists were hoarding food, they were preventing us from having food. This is all documented. The myths that have been about Aleppo and Syria in general have been that the Syrian government and army are starving the population. Again, I refer to testimonies of people, even people I met with in November. I met with a family of displaced people from Al-Halak, which is north of Bustan al-Pasha, which was an area, both areas occupied by terrorists. At that time, when I met them on November 10th, he told me that they had fled along with about 40 others on about 20 days prior, and that they had tried twice prior to flee, but they were prevented violently from doing so by the terrorists that inhabited those areas. This is the case. These are the testimonies coming out of Aleppo now. People saying, we tried to flee, they wouldn't let us, they shot at us. There are also videos showing people who did manage to flee coming under fire and the Syrian army actually protecting them, acting as human shields. So that's to say that what we've been hearing in the corporate media is not depicting an accurate image of what's happening in Aleppo. The corporate media is saying that the Syrian army is attacking people, and until today, the corporate media is maintaining this, even though the exact opposite is true.
Now, remember the chemical weapons that our mainstream media told us that Assad was using on his people, but then we found video of the Free Syrian Army and others using them in actuality, so of course it was a fake story. Well, here's just another source, here's just another piece of evidence that proves we were right all along.
Also documented are that areas in these areas occupied by terrorists, including a school, were housing chemicals used to make chemical weapons. And you could see also the gas canisters that were used to make explosive gas canister bombs. In fact, even when I was in Leyramun, we saw a factory in one of the buildings that was used to make gas canister bombs. In Leyramun, we also saw evidence of the so-called Free Syrian Army that some people say doesn't exist anymore. The 16th Brigades was active there. They had a cell underground, 3 stories below, that was perfectly intact in spite of aerial bombings above ground. And I make this point because people talk about the destruction in Aleppo as if the physical destruction matters. It's the people that the Syrian government and the Syrian people care about. And the destruction in areas occupied by terrorists occurs because the terrorists are bunkering below ground, come up above ground, fire their bombs on civilian populations, and go back below ground.
Also, the mainstream media has reported numerous times that Russia has blown up hospitals all over Aleppo and that they're committing tons of human rights abuses. Well, here's the actual skinny from the boots on the ground, Eva Bartlett, Canadian independent journalist.
Hospitals have been attacked. Well, this media is referring to the pockets of Aleppo that were occupied by terrorists. And they have manufactured stories, and I can give you a precise account. In April of this year, there was a hospital called the Al-Quds Hospital, which in a concerted effort, all media said was attacked and targeted and badly damaged by either the Syrians or the Russians. In fact, the Russians had satellite imagery showing that this hospital was in the same shape that it was in October 2015. No difference. Therefore, it was not attacked. Months later, The Guardian, which is a prominent British newspaper, actually said the Al-Quds Hospital that it had alleged months prior to be attacked and destroyed was treating victims of so-called chemical weapons attacks. So even the media that is lying is inconsistent in their lies. But there have been hospitals attacked. I went to the Al-Dabit Hospital, which is in Aleppo City. It's a maternity hospital. It was attacked on May 3rd, and 3 women were killed. You would think this would be something raised at the UN or by so-called human rights groups, but it was not. In December 2013, the Kindi Hospital was attacked and destroyed. It was the largest and best cancer treatment hospital in the Middle East. It was destroyed by al-Nusra terrorist truck bombings. And in fact, in recent media reports on Aleppo, again alleging Syrian or Russian strikes on hospitals, Fox News actually had the audacity to use a photo of Al-Kindi Hospital and allege that this is in eastern areas of Aleppo and that this hospital had been attacked by Syrian or Russian strikes. This goes to show how much the media has been lying from the very beginning about Syria and continues to lie.
So it wasn't the Russians, it was actually the terrorists using truck bombs. At the end of her press conference, she opened it up for questions, and one Dutch journalist asked her why she was calling the Western media liars. She asked him to name one Western-backed humanitarian organization that's in Syria.
There are none. These organizations are relying on the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in Coventry, UK, and which is one man.
Coincidentally, this is the same Syrian Observatory for Human Rights that just said every hour butcheries are carried out concerning executions of civilians being done by the Syrian army. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Είμαι ο πατέρας Κωνσταντίνου, είμαι δημοτικός σύμβουλος Αθήνας από την Ανταρσία και από την κίνηση ενωμένη ενάντια στο ρατσισμό και τη φασιστική απειλή. Είμαστε εδώ για να στείλουμε το μήνυμα στήριξη στον αγώνα που γίνεται εδώ στην Ελλάδα για να φύγει ο πρέσβης. Είναι ένας αγώνας, μέρος του αγώνα που γίνεται μέσα στη Συρία για να πέσει η χούντα του Μπασάρ Αλ-Ασαντ. Όλο αυτό το κίνημα για τη δημοκρατία και τις ελευθερίες είναι ένα κίνημα για να σώσουμε τη δημοκρατία, για να σώσουμε τους απλούς ανθρώπους της δουλειάς από όλα τα δεινά τα οποία συμβαίνουν στη χώρα τους. Δηλώνουμε λοιπόν την αλληλεγγύη μας και θέλουμε να σας καλέσουμε να πάρετε μέρος στο συλλαλητήριο του άλλο Σάββατο 3 του μήνα, 2 ώρες στην Ομόνια. Μαζί με όλους τους μετανάστες θανάτους και